Okay, if everybody could go ahead and take their seats, we are going to get started. Welcome. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. My name is Kaitlyn. I am the Executive Director here at the Matheson History Museum, and we are delighted that you have chosen to spend your Saturday afternoon with us. Before we get started, I just wanted to thank our partner for this event, the Florida Defenders of the Environment, as well as our sponsors, Visit Gainesville, Alachua County, who help to make our exhibits and programs possible. Another thing that makes our exhibits and programs possible are our members and donors. So we have two of our lovely board members at a table here in the back, where you can purchase a copy of the book, as well as become a member of the museum to help support the work that we do here. So I do encourage you to go see Greg and Courtney if you haven't already. We really appreciate the support of our members and hope that you will join us as well. So I am going to turn it over to Steve Robitaille, who is the treasurer for Florida Defenders of the Environment. And he will get started with our program and start to introduce the rest of our speakers. So again, thank you for joining us. And Steve, please take it away.
Well, first of all, Kaitlyn and Joanna and your whole staff, thank you so much for helping us put this together. This morning, I must start by saying this morning I was next door at Sweetwater for the celebration of life for Mary Barrow. And there's a real strong connection between our being in this room and Mary Barrow and Mark Barrow. They were the heart and soul of historic preservation in this area. I think she did. There were paintings of over 24 houses that she restored over time. And Mark, I met in 1980, and he gave me one of his, from his huge collection, this historic postcard of the Swanee, which I was able to use in that film. And then and I'm always will be indebted to this, he introduced me to Archie Carr, which resulted in another film. And they are responsible for this space. They renovated the Matheson home and created this museum. So I think we should celebrate dedicate this reading to the Barrows, maybe. So Florida Defenders of the Environment, in addition to trying to get rid of a hulk of rusty metal in Putnam County, and I won't, we made great inroads this past year with our coalition, but I won't go into that. We also are dedicated to environmental education, and we consider the opportunity to introduce you to these readers to be a wonderful opportunity to do that. Thank you for coming. We have a table in the back that does have membership cards. Some of you probably get our monitor if you're a member. If you're not, you can find us online. If you didn't get a monitor, there are copies in the back. So it's my pleasure to introduce one of the two editors of this anthology, along with Jack Davis, who could not be here. Leslie Poole is Assistant Professor of Environmental Studies at Rollin College. He's also the author of Saving Florida, Women's Fight for the Environment in the 20th Century. And she and Jack put together this wonderful group of readings, and I'm going to introduce her to carry us forward.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Kaitlyn. I want to be able to understand myself, so I'm going to do that. I'm so pleased to see so many people out here on a potentially swelteringly thunderstormy kind of day, but this is a book of love, I tell everybody, and I hope that you're going to feel some love today. We're going to have readings from 4 of the different essays in the book, but first, if you don't mind, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the origin of the book. The University Press of Florida had a previous edition of this book called The Wild Heart of Florida, and they approached Jack Davis, who you all may know, who teaches at University of Florida, and asked him if he'd be interested in a second edition. And Jack, who was my PhD dissertation advisor, and we still speak, actually, and we're friends, invited me to work with him. And we decided to use a whole new set of authors, a whole new group of writers that are representing Florida opinions and ideas today, and including poetry. So we have some poetry in the book this time as well. And I want you all to know that all of the authors who wrote these essays wrote them for free. All of the proceeds are going to the Nature Conservancy of Florida. And we are so happy to also today to be promoting the Florida Defenders of the Environment, which is a group that I have been in contact and treasured for many, many years, going all the way back to when I interviewed Margaret Carr for my master's thesis. So I really appreciate the work that they do as well. We're lucky to have them on our side. So let me just read a little bit from the introduction, then I'll read a little bit from the essay that I wrote and tell you a little bit about that. Oh, and I want to mention too, we will be signing books afterwards. If any of you want signatures, we will be happy to take care of that for you too. With the dawn of each day, Floridians awaken to a rapidly diminishing future for the state's unique and glorious natural systems. As the bulldozers rev up, cars enter highways, and construction cranes begin to swing, our wild places become more precious and threatened. The loss is not only habitat for flora and fauna, but also reflects a darkening of the state's soul, a place built on the idea of finding Eden, health, and beauty. What better way to understand and acknowledge the magnitude of such losses than to celebrate our wildest treasures? That's the goal of the Wilder Heart of Florida. Most of the essays and poems have never before been published. And we have 34 different essayists who participated as well. And what we write about is our love of irreplaceable landscapes and seascapes. We hope to inspire. You know, it's easy to get beaten over the head every day with bad news, but this, we think, if we can get you to love Florida, then maybe you'll be inspired to help protect and take care of it. We live in a time when extensive and invaluable scientific research can enlarge our understanding of the natural environment, but a story has the capacity to reach beyond the intellectual, to touch something within, an instinct or primordial memory that turns one's attention more acutely to the animating world that gives not just pleasure, but life itself. Perhaps the observations, experiences, and emotions shared in this collection of essays will inspire deeper thinking and constructive conversations about consequential issues related to the human condition and Florida nature. The one is inseparable from the other. So that was our intent with this volume. And for me, the hardest part was picking out what to write about, because I'm a fourth generation Floridian. I love to hike and kayak and travel all over the state. My favorite towns are the ones that only have one blinking light, if that. So that this became my excuse to go do something I had always wanted to do, which is go out with a field biologist at the Disney Wilderness Preserve near Disney World. Have any of you been to the preserve? See, that's the crazy part. Nobody knows it exists, but I'm going to tell you a little bit about it. But what we did is we went on an expedition to go look for very endangered red cockaded woodpeckers. So let me tell you just a little bit from that. A spring breeze swirls under the vibrant blue ether as I inhale, pausing to switch the 20-pound pole to my left shoulder. Sweat dribbles down my neck when I resume the trek through the thigh-high palmettos, trying to keep up with my energetic expedition leader, Beatrice Pace Aldana. B stops ahead under a tall pine tree girded with white paint. Upward, she points, and there it is, a small hole 15 feet high, surrounded by thick bark with dripping, gooey sap. We attach a small, slender peeper scope to the end of the telescoping pole, adjusting and wiggling it until the camera slips into the gap. Looking at a handheld monitor, we exhale with excitement. 3 tiny fuzzballs are peering back, expecting a meal. This is success, a trio of newborn red-cockaded woodpeckers, once commonplace throughout the southeastern United States, but now listed as federally endangered species. The birds are on the brink of extinction because of their need to nest in living longleaf pine trees that once blanketed Florida north of Lake Okeechobee and ranged through most of the southeastern United States. But with human development, logging, and turpentine operations in the 19th century, some 98% of the longleaf disappeared, one of the worst habitat losses in the world. That we are observing them through a wobbling camera rig in a place that was once a logged over cattle ranch and later planned to become a housing development is a minor miracle and proof that some wildness can be restored in Florida, a dream and promise for future generations. That vision is being realized in the Disney Wilderness Preserve, an 11,500 acre tract located at the edge of Central Florida's suburban chaos. The preserve's name is a paradox. Disney and the resulting theme park boom are the engines that turned the rural citrus growing region into a traffic and development nightmare, displacing wildlife, wetlands, and forests. But the preserve, run by the Nature Conservancy since 1992, also exists thanks to Disney, which led the way in the development and funding for it in order to mitigate wetland destruction and impacts caused by construction of its Animal Kingdom theme park and the nearby Celebration community. As a result, Disney Wilderness Preserve is the first large-scale off-site restoration program of its kind, setting an example of how collaboration between diverse partners can create something wild in a place where nature is slowly vanishing. The irony, but the wonderful result. A view across the preserve of green, gold, and brown at sedges, lopsided Indian grass, and palmettos resembles what Native people and early pioneers may have encountered. The tall stands of longleaf are thriving once again, their needles singing an aeolian harmony as the wind rises. That to me is the specialness of this place, that it looks natural, untouched by modern technology, which can't be further from the truth. For 2 decades after its creation, the preserve managers and scientists studied, planned, and then carried out a careful strategy for ecosystem management to bring it back to nature. They removed non-native species, filled in 20 miles of 10-foot deep ditches, and removed dikes to restore natural water flow. Importantly, they brought fire back to the landscape through regular controlled burns that simulate historic burns. As a result, the preserve's flatwoods, scrub habitat, and 4,000 acres of wetlands have returned to a semblance of normal, especially important since the preserve is part of the headwaters of the beleaguered Everglades system, now the focus of an $8 billion+ federal state restoration effort. I first visited the preserve in the early 1990s. I had met some folks whose excitement about the project was palpable. They invited me to stay in a cabin, which was really kind of an old hunting trailer, with my husband and 2 young sons. And as far as I know, we were the only people on the property that weekend. My sons were excited to walk down dirt roads. We found bones, we saw turkeys, we saw a snake dozing in the sun. They felt like real explorers, especially when we realized that the oak hammocks shading our cabin was likely the site of a native hunting camp hundreds of years ago. No television, no telephones, and no one cared. Through the years, I've visited the preserve to witness its slow evolution. The ditches are long gone, although vague scars remain where they once existed. Regular burning has reduced overgrown stands of plants and invasive species, clearing out the understory like a vacuum so the natural grasses can flourish. I've done my best to share this treasure, hiking sandy paths with friends and taking my college classes there on field trips. While I was overjoyed during one trip to see an endangered Florida scrub jay, a bird found only in the state's scrub habitat, my students were more excited about a deer that walked across the road. The scrub jay has highly specific needs, including an ecosystem that regularly burns, another indicator of the preserve's vitality. And as much as I tried to convey that to my students, that the scrub jay was really cool, I think they preferred Bambi as well as their ride on an oversized swamp buggy through the backwoods. But when we go to Lake Russell and stand there, I have my students dip their hands into the lake. And I remind them that they are touching Everglades waters, that the drips from their fingers meander all the way to the southern tip of the state without ever again being this pristine. And that's the truth about Florida, indeed of the world today. Few unspoiled spots of nature exist. And I will stop there and encourage you to read the rest. Thank you. I'm going to introduce each of our next authors as they come to speak. It's my great pleasure to introduce to you Lars Andersen. How many of you have been kayaking with Lars? He always has a fan club, doesn't he? Lars is the author of Payne's Prairie, The Great Savannah, A History and Guide. He's a full-time river guide for Adventure Outpost, and I've been on so many trips, I've lost count around Florida. He and his wife, Patsy, live in the Ichetucknee Forest near Fort White, Florida. He's here to talk about one of his favorite places.
I can't believe how my hands just went up. That's amazing. That means y'all know how much I love being in front of a microphone up here. I can really relate to your deer story there. That's my life as a river guide. You know, you're showing all this great stuff and they're seeing something else. You have to tell people it's really interesting out there sometimes. I had a group once, we had a family of limpkins the mother feeding limpkins at this film crew, TV film crew. And they shoot over there and then they kind of pan the other way, looking at some little flowers, said, no. Trust me, that's what you need to see. Anyway, sorry, I divert. So I kind of printed some stuff out, but because I need some bigger print, my eyes are going weird on me here. So some clips out of the book here, a few different excerpts from a couple of places out of my essay. Several years ago, Payne's Prairie, Hurricane Irma flooded Payne's Prairie, as you guys know. Actually, it's been almost 5 years ago. I can't believe that, but I was looking that up. But it's, we've never really had that happen before. In the past 20 years, it's happened 3 different times, multi-year floods. But before that, in my childhood, growing up for 60 years, we never had that going on. So it's just it's a new thing. But anyway, so it flooded. Payne's Prairie Park Preserve asked to follow, or they invited me to come out and lead some tours out there. So I did. One of those tours, Leslie and Bruce Hunt, whose photo is on the cover of this, excellent photo here. But they were on one of the trips, which happened to be the same trip that I wrote about for my essay here. So to start our paddle trip, we started at La Chua Trail. And at that time, it was still a little bit flooded. So we had to wade for about the first 100 yards or so out to the water deep enough to get into our boats. So we're slogging down the trail, and I stepped out to the side for a second just to kind of take in this view. It's just, Payne's Prairie is now this big lake, and it's always beautiful, but now it's just surreal. Like I said, for all these years, I'd never really seen it like that, but I realized that this is kind of this is the way it's supposed to be, really. It occurred to me that this is the way Payne's Prairie is supposed to look. So I was kind of looking at this landscape, lost in these thoughts. My crew is filing past behind me. I can hear their feet slogging by. And as I'm looking at the scene, hearing this slogging, it dawns on me that, the Payne's Prairie that I grew up with as a kid was, all this time I thought I knew Payne's Prairie, great wildlife, all this great stuff, but it was really a very impaired Payne's Prairie, so I always had the impression that I was seeing such a wonderful natural resource, but now standing there looking out at that, it really hit home that, the changes, the improvements that have been made with the restoration efforts in the last several years have really made a big difference. And we're now seeing for the first time, I was seeing a healthy Payne's Prairie, or a healthier Payne's Prairie than I'd probably ever seen in my life. So that was kind of a revelation for me. It was like an epiphany. So it's like that with epiphanies. 1 minute you're slogging in knee-deep water that is usually a dry hiking trail. The next, something you see or hear maybe the rhythmic slogging of feet that sounds vaguely like a beating heart, sparks an idea that morphs into an exciting insight about the terrain around you. You pause to contemplate and are lost in these thoughts when suddenly something grabs your attention and reminds you that you were supposed to be leading a tour and all your group has passed you by and are now 150 yards ahead getting into their boats. I'm like that. I do that kind of thing. All of y'all know, you see me drifting down the river looking the other way. So for the rest of the day, we're paddling around and just kind of telling the stories about the prairie, sort of the history and such, including some of the geology. And we paddled out into Alachua Sink itself and went up to that big limestone boulder that's out in the middle of the sink there. You guys probably have seen that, you know, that iconic boulder out there. But a few of us paddled up close to it to get a good look at it and get a look at what it was made of. I think Leslie and Bruce might have been with me. We pulled up close to this thing. A bit of pushing and pulling gets me close enough to reach out and touch the cream-colored rock and move my hand over its intricately chiseled face. It feels cool and oddly damp. The sharp edges of fossilized shells and hard bits of long extinct sea creatures dig into my fingertips. From this close perspective, I can tell this is no simple rock. It is an ossuary, every inch of it packed with the remains of sea creatures, large and microscopic, that have lived and died on this spot. A geologist could read the stories told in this rock face the way archaeologists read petroglyphs. And in those stories, she would find one simple overarching theme. Payne's Prairie was born under the water of a shallow sea. For millions of years of its infancy, the Florida Peninsula lay under a shallow sea teeming with wild menagerie of wild aquatic creatures. When they died, their remains rained to the seafloor. Modern deep sea explorers describe marine snow comprised of minute bits of decaying sea creatures that drift incessantly to the ocean bottom. At times, it creates underwater whiteouts. This snowpack of animal bits accumulated and compacted under its own weight for millions of years, forming the sedimentary rock called limestone. By the time this deposition ended, Florida's limestone platform had grown to 2,000 to 3,000 feet thick in places. As with its culture, the land of Florida is built upon those who lived here before us. We continued our paddle around, touching on different aspects and different chapters of Florida's story, the Seminoles and William Bartram and the famous 20-year flood of Alachua Lake in the 1800s when Payne's Prairie was full, like it is now. That's probably the last long flood before this one. And then we kind of ended talking about Sweetwater wetlands. And in reality, this whole essay is almost like an ode to Sweetwater wetlands, because what's happening at Payne's Prairie, this new revitalized Payne's Prairie, is thanks to the Sweetwater wetlands. And I know Bob Knight is in the group somewhere here, and thank you, Bob. Bob was very instrumental in that thing happening and designing it and all that. So it's an amazing thing. And it's also a great birding place, Sweetwater wetlands. So we continued on and then finally ended back at shore. We pulled our boats onto solid ground in the shade of a giant live oak. With a hive of activity swirling around us, a few of our group were talking about the trip, saying goodbyes, when the conversation was interrupted by the low rumbling bellow of a nearby gator. I recognized the sound immediately, but in the flicker of that first instant, before my rational brain stepped in, my imagination took the reins. And for just that instant, my primal mind, the one steeped in superstition and still viewing this world through the lens of a morning epiphany, heard the groan of a waking giant.
All right, that was lovely. That was a wonderful day that we traveled together. Our next speaker is Margaret Tolbert. How many of you have been to see Margaret's paintings around town? She always has a fan club too, and I'm one of them. Margaret is a Gainesville-based artist whose work is an effect of immersion in water, especially from the springs heartland of the Floridan aquifer. Her paintings have been in installations and collections on 4 continents, and she uses them to connect viewers to water as a subject, cultural traditions in water, and the water's point of view. So welcome, Margaret.
Hello, I'm very happy to, this has just grown into my face, so lots to say. I'm very happy to be here, and the Matheson has been such a great forum for issues about water and wild Florida and important causes in art. I'm very grateful for all they continually provide for us, and FDE is leading the fight in so many ways. They're always doing something great and interesting. I confess, I thought by now, and I know it's coming soon, but I didn't write a lot about the Lost Springs because I figured, hey, but it'll, soon we'll write about just how we can go there every day. So I thought since I was I was a visual artist in the pack, and maybe I would do these I do these kind of little verbal algorithms. And if I looked at them later, they kind of call back what the place is like. And also if you're floating down, I do draw underwater, but if you're floating underwater, mostly you get little snatches of phrases. They kind of come to you. And so then I try to remember them and write them down. It's easier than doing sketches or certainly paintings. But I do, if I'm kayaking, I'm doing these little, here's a sketch of a turtle at night. We were kayaking at night and it was trying to sleep on the side of the Gilchrist Blue Springs. I mean, I didn't know they sort of sleep like this. And then, and some sketches like that. So I carry these sketchbooks, and there's the eye of the spring. And I thought I might start with going to Salt Springs, which is, when I do this, I try to just look, think about it. This is just a very strange experience you're in right now. So try to, this composing a tune, you try to find the right notes. It's like, what is it like? What is it like? So they're not very polished, but these help me a lot later. Instantly plug into the different energy of Salt Springs. Water with a tang, like a sports drink. Yellow light snaps, crackles up through the water like flames. From the walkway, a strange vista spreads out below. Quadrals of stone and mint green water, a kind of bobbing baklava. Nautical lines made by the ancient hand of water. Liquefying stair steps are into the white ellipses of the boil. From below, looking up through the water, the sky a warped blue shaped by stone pylons. Spring boil signposted by glassy surfaces amidst choppy marks of the waves in the headspring. Underwater, giant molars like flower buds begin to bloom open in waves of light. Everything that thinks it is straight is transformed into arabesque motion and energy. Become like the whimsical and wayward schools of fish tossed from one spring to the next. A skate pressed into a crevice, baleful glare. Blue crab flies like a bullet across the void. The others stuck like butterflies on the angles of the rocks. A blue crab like the Andromeda galaxy angles down into the the eye's deep and violent abyss. Another more intrepid crab crests a rock. Bold man. I'm chased by a blue crab as I exit the depths. Enter a vase. I mean, this is what it's like. I'm entering a vase shaped out of stone, a deep and narrow crucible for light that streams like steam to the surface water. My head is upside down, wreathed in two currents of warm and cool water, chill water and warmer. I'm in the vast columnar folds of a giant's molars. Chill water and warmer. I'm hanging onto the edges of the great teeth. Stay upside down, face into the current like any fish would do. An aquifer world streams past me. Red-orange flecks from the flow propel upwards. I can feel eyes on me. An armored catfish is on the wall. Drops like a weight, weaves down into the gloom of a cave opening. Colors crackle in an electric cloud of light. Fish winnow the current in a shifting grid, flash in the distance, rub down in the creases and valleys of rock. Toward the river, the floor rises, spreads out on a carpet of snails long gone. No one in the shells. And then there's one, I went to Bozell Springs, and I'm telling you, the tree dove into the spring. So I'm still trying to figure this one out, but it's inspired a lot of paintings. If a tree falls in the springs, did it mean to? It's like at Bozell Springs on the Chipola River, a tree in a spring. It's a narrow spring. Do y'all know Bozell? Have you been there? Beautiful. It's a narrow spring, one of 4 in a sequence. Each spring with a miniature turquoise fairyland beneath, crags and precipices, castle towers and deep valleys, rocky stone bridges picked out of a beam of light. The beam passes slowly, picking out minute details and structures as the sun moves, like a twist of a kaleidoscope, and then each tiny part is illuminated. It was late spring. Trees seem to love to touch the water, but they hesitate at the water's edge. Well, not this one. This tree had to go in. I didn't remember if the leaves were gold or crystal. I lost the page. It's confusing because the leaves were all lighted up. I didn't remember roots. So here's how it went down. The tree cast itself in the water like a lance. It dove in and it became light glowing everywhere as we swam in and around the branches, at once gilded with light and flashing it. Says, what did the spring do? From the rocky labyrinth far below, the sand flies high in the spring, a skyward arc, then it settles back down, sliding down the leaves of the tree. If you dusted for fingerprints, you could not dust any more thoroughly than the fingers of the aquifer sifting sand over each surface, aquifer snow falling in an upside down world.
Cynthia Barnett was scheduled to speak today, but was unable to come. She sends her regrets, but we've had the most remarkable person step up to the plate for us, Jenny Carr, whose grandmother was Marjorie Carr, who helped found the Florida Defenders of the Environment. And Jenny is a scientist in her own right. And she has agreed to be a really good sport and read from one of the essays in our collection that actually was a historical essay. And it was written by Harriet Beecher Stowe, the author of Uncle Tom's Cabin. And it appeared in the 1873 newspaper, The Christian Union. And on it, Stowe takes a trip down the Ocklawaha and has much to describe. And so thinking about it, what it looked like in 1873 versus today, I'm going to let Jenny talk to you, read from that.
Thank you. Up the Ocklawaha, a sail into fairyland. We have done it, whether in the body or out. We have been to dreamland, to the land of the fays and the elves, the land where reality ceases and romance begins. In the measurement of earth and in the geographic language of reality, this was accomplished in a 6 days journey on the little steamer Ocklawaha. We left Mandarin at 11 o'clock on Thursday, March 27, and returned to it again the next Tuesday afternoon. We had often noticed, passing by on the river, the little steamer Ocklawaha, looking for all the world like a gray square cotton bale. And we confess that we shuddered at the idea of going on a bushwhacking tour through the native swamps of the alligator in such a suspicious looking craft as that. But the experiences of more venturesome friends who dared and did went up and came back with songs of joy upon their heads, persuaded us. Our tourist friends, persons of renowned good sense, came back from their trip fairly inebriated with enthusiasm, wild with incoherent raptures. They had seen Europe and Italy, Naples and the Blue Grotto, but never had they in their lives seen aught so entrancing as this. It was a spectacle, weird, wondrous, magical, to be remembered as one of the things of a lifetime. Well, really, after this, who would not expect to be disappointed? Who, going with such a fanfaronade of expectations, would not come on back a little worse for experience? Nevertheless, we have been and come back and are not disappointed, but prepared to chorus the most extravagant laudations of our friends. How is it we know not? You know, it is a wide attested fact that there are places and regions on earth where the fays and the dryads and other wood spirits still live, who enchant the eyes of the comer and bear him off into magical regions and bewilder him till he don't know whether he has been on earth or under it. We have almost forgotten our classical literature, but we dimly remember the cave of Trophonius and the shades of the Delphic oracle and Lake Avernus, whence Virgil descended into the Elysian fields. The fountain of immortal youth, which Ponce de Leon supposed was to be found in the heart of Florida, could have been no other than the Silver Spring, whose magical waters, like a great glancing chrysolite, lie in the heart of these unknown forests. So while you, my poor, dear, virtuous friends, were fighting with roaring March winds up in the still vexed north, behold us stepping on the board, the little steamer Ocklawaha, on a bright day with a gay and festive party of young people. To begin with, our boat was an agreeable disappointment. We had always dreaded the boat as the abatement of the pleasure. For what, we said, could be done with 20 passengers on such a little craft. We found, however, a neat, well-ventilated cabin with berths for 8 ladies, as comfortable as could be desired. Then there were 6 more staterooms opening from the central cabin of 2 berths each. The captain was all accommodation. Every hand on board, cook, steward, waiter, were as good-natured and obliging as could be desired. And the passengers in return were good-natured, polite to each other, and unexacting in their requirements. And so to the little bark came to be looked on as quite a nice little home. As to our table, it was crowded, to be sure, both the dishes and with guests. And as the whole cookery had to be done in a place no bigger than a good-sized pocket handkerchief. The results were certainly not to be severely criticized. If the proof of the pudding be in the eating, certainly the guests did ample justice to their meals, eating to right and left in a most complimentary manner. In fact, although we started on this expedition feeling rather poorly and with a very faint appetite, we became uncritical devourers of whatever was set before us, merely from living all day in the fine open air that blew across the boat's deck. Our voyage circumstantially may be thus narrated. From the pier in Mandarin, as aforementioned, we stepped aboard about 11 o'clock in the forenoon of Thursday. Our little slow stern wheel boat made the best of her way upward and reached Palatka just about 7 o'clock. The boat lay there an hour or two. Then we all took to our berths, opened our little slides of windows for the river breeze to blow through, and resigned ourselves peacefully to sleep. In the middle of the night, we were waked by the scraping of branches against our little boat and looked dreamily out to see what we were gliding through palmetto forests and weird grottos, lit up with blazing pine torches. It seemed part of a fantastic dream as our weary eyes closed and the boat rippled on. Friday morning, we were waked by the singing of birds in the branches to find ourselves still gliding through the arches of an unbroken forest. We sat on a little platform in front of the pilot house and glided along, seeing into the very heart of the tropical mysteries. Sometimes the whole way seemed given up to palmetto groves, rising in every conceivable shape and variety, growing with a luxuriance and a grace indescribable. The trunk of the palms sometimes seems a regular and exact pillar of basket work built up 20 or 30 feet. In the crevices of the basket work, large ferns and air plants take root, so that the tree is often a pillar of various foliage and flowers. Here and there, the palms lean aslant over the water. They throw themselves forward and meet in arches overhead. They lie creeping in scaly folds on the ground. They wave 60 or 70 feet high in the air. The oldest palms have shed the scaly basket-like enclosure and are round and smooth like columns. The latest scales only remaining high up in the air, and the ferns and the vines waving from them like streamers. But by far the greater part of the way, the palmetto was gracefully intermixed with other trees. The cypress, with its glistening white trunk and shapely pillars, rises to an immense height, its snowy columns reflected far down in the smooth, glassy water. The palms sometimes seemed embraced in the white arms of cypress, leaning their plumy heads against its branches, their dusky hue contrasting with the vivid yellow-green of the cypress feathers. The other trees were the water ash, the loblolly bay, the magnolia glauca, certain varieties of red maple and water oaks, and a few of the magnolia grandiflora. Growth seemed to have run riot here, to have broken into strange goblin forms, such as Doré might have chosen for his weird imaging. Here, where forage nature has been let alone, where the fiery heats and the moist soil have conspired together, there is a netting and convoluting, a twisting and weaving and intertwining of all sorts of growths. And one might fancy it as an enchanted forest, where the trees were going to change into something new and unheard of. The alligator seems to belong most naturally in these shades. The long-necked water turkey sits perched gravely on the boughs overhead or dives into the waters below. The limpkin with its long neck and legs and its wild plaintive cry. The white crane and blue crane, the pink and white curlew, these seem the fit inhabitants for whom these forest solitudes are made. The dreamy wildness, the perfect strangeness of all this, its utter unlikeness to anything one has ever seen, inclines one to aimless reverie. The stories of Tic and Touquet seem quite possible here. The boat glides on from hour to hour as the river winds and winds and turns and doubles upon itself, with still the same flowery solitudes reverberating with the same wild cries of birds, glittering in slanting sunbeams, festooned with waving garlands that hang from tree to tree. At intervals, the steam whistle startles the birds. It makes the forest echoes ring. It is a sign that we are coming to a landing. The inhabited country of this region is an elevated tract that lies back of the river, and these landings are breathing holes, vistas opening from the interminable forest mystery into human abodes. Generally, at one of these landings, a letterbox is nailed up conspicuously on the trunk of some cypress or other large tree, where letters and papers are left for the families whose invisible homes lie beyond. Sometimes a group of 2 or 3 smart hunters in high-peaked hats, attired in homespun garments with knives in their boots, stood leaning on their guns, waiting the approach of the boat. They seemed a grave, taciturn, unsmiling race, long-haired, bearded, and roughly attired, with the shallow complexion and dark eyes that gave intimations of Minorcan blood. They reminded us of the shepherds of the Campania. Occasionally, a wild turkey or a saddle of venison hung in the tree, promised a supply to the provision market of the boat. They brought pailfuls of new laid eggs and sometimes baskets of great golden oranges, which the captain bought and dispensed liberally among the passengers. The weekly touching of the boats at these lonely landings are the only communication these settlers hold with the outside world. A more solitary life cannot be imagined. Perhaps our voyage through these unbroken forests might have been in time somewhat monotonous, had not a dozen or 2 mighty hunters kept us from going to sleep by the briskness of their firing. There were on board a few good marksmen who knew how to hit what they fired at, but about an equal number of inexperienced hands foaming at the mouth with excitement, and quite likely to hit any one of us as the alligators. The cry, "There's a gator," was a signal for a perfect fusillade, which much more dangerous to us than to the alligators, who generally dove and paddled off. The first day on board was a hot one and was like a 4th of July in a city, an unintermittent blaze and fizz. Every lady on board had a headache, and the coming on of night was a welcome relief. Then came the lighting of the great pine knot brazier over the pilot house, and we sat on the deck watching the weird effects of the firelight up the long watery aisles and the colonnades of the palmy woods. Saturday morning, we woke in the broad savannas, waving fields of water plants, water lilies, yellow and white arrowheads, pickerel weed, water lettuce, and every other aquatic plant that can be thought of. We're here in wide sweeping fields of undulating waves. It was a lake of lilies, tall bulrushes, 6 or 7 feet high, waved and nodded, and on every bulrush perched a red-winged blackbird. It was a prairie of birds. They rose in clouds. They sang and capered, lit on the tip end of bulrushes and slid down to the middle, then swung busily with their short, airy whistle, the picture of joy. A beautiful little water bird with blue feathers and red head and feet flitted over the water lily leaves, and 1 or 2 flocks of green and gold paraquets rose on wing and soared away. The water turkey and the blue and white crane, by their heedless conduct in perching squarely inside of the boat, destroyed a great deal of our pleasure. We did not want to see them fall mangled and fluttering under the awkward shots of some of our sportsmen, and left to starve to death lingeringly as the boat glided on. The destructive instincts of the hunter seemed to destroy all sympathy with nature, all sense of beauty, of scenery, or interest in its various sources of knowledge. The savannas in which we sailed all day Saturday gradually merged into a chain of beautiful lakes. Lakes Griffin, Eustis, and Harris. We entered Lake Griffin on Saturday evening. It is a charming sheet of water with high banks, on some of which are fine building sites. In the dim gray of the dawn, Sunday morning, we woke to find ourselves tied up to a wharf at Okahumpkie. We turned over and went to sleep, and when we woke again, the boat was far on her homeward way again. We were just passing out of Lake Eustis into Lake Griffin, and as we left the breakfast table, it was as lovely a day as heart could imagine, angelically clear and fresh, and our quartet sat on the deck and sang hymns in infinite variety. In our youth, a religious hymn was the most long-drawn and doleful sound conceivable. Now, under the genial culture of the Sunday school, hymns have budded and blossomed. They are full of life and color and motion. Sunday night, the wonders of our voyage came to a climax. The captain had announced to us that the boat would enter the Silver Spring between 1 and 2 o'clock, and advised us to sit up if we wanted to see the very finest part of the route. We did sit up, prepared as we were by a night's experience in wild forest traveling. We were taken by surprise by the wonderful scenes through which we passed. We seemed floating through an immense cathedral whose white marble columns met in vast arches overhead and were reflected in the glassy depths below. The dusky plumes of the palmetto waving above, lit by torchlight, looked like a fine tracery of a wondrous sculptured roof. The brilliant underwhite of the bay leaves, the transparent red of the water maple, and the soft, vivid feathers of the cypress had a magical brilliancy as our light passed through the wooded aisles. The reflected firelight gave the most peculiar effect. Every trunk and limb and branch of the trees, down to the minutest spray, was of glistening whiteness, like ivory. The gray moss that streamed down seemed like crepey veils of silver, and was a wonderful profusion, and in some cases veiling the trees entirely. In the stillness of the night, our gliding boat seemed to float like a specter. Clouds of fragrance were wafted to us from distant orange groves. The cranes and herons and wildwood birds would wake, dazed with the glare of our torches, and flutter into our very hands as we passed. We took the one step from the sentimental to the ludicrous, when one of our party most unexpectedly captured a water turkey from a bough just over our head and held him aloft in wild excitement. The poor bird made the best use of his long snaky neck, throwing himself with open mouth hither and thither among the company with a plucky show of fight, till between laughing and alarm, we were thoroughly discomposed and prevailed on his captor to throw him back into the trees. What a night was that! Everybody watched and wondered, and the most prosaic grew poetic. About 1 o'clock, we glided into the Silver Spring Run, and by 2, we were all gathered on the lower deck, looking down into the transparent depths that gave the impression that our boat was moving through air. Every pebble and aquatic plant we glided over seemed in the torchlight invested with prismatic brightness. When the boat at last came to landing in the Silver Spring, we laid us down to sleep, fairly tired out with excitement to wait for the morning. Monday morning broke bright and beautiful, and there we lay in a little wooded basin, a quarter mile in diameter, with all the underworld clearly revealed from its translucent depths. The water had the crystalline clearness and the magical prismatic reflections which give such charm to the blue grotto at Capri. Ribs of limestone rock are seen far down, and the spring boils and bubbles upward, throwing up thousands of gallons a minute without making more than a ripple on the surface. A party of us got into a little skiff and floated over the transparent depths. Every variety of water plant was growing and waving over the varied surfaces of the bottom, which had its heights and depths, its caverns and grottos. We could see the fish darting hither and thither and mark on the brilliant sands at the bottom various objects which had been thrown in by experimenting travelers. The water was of about the same high temperature with the spring at Green Cave. The shores were clothed with tropical forests all around, and here and there we could see starry flocks of a peculiar and beautiful white lily, which grows abundantly on these waters. From a star-shaped calyx of 6 narrow white leaves comes out a silver cup. From the edges of this cup rise 6 stamens with their golden heads. As the boat passed from the shadows of the Ocklawaha to the broad St. John's, 3 cheers made the woods ring, and our camping in the wilderness was over.
All right, well, that was really wonderful. And I know that I am looking forward to reading the book. So again, thank you all for joining us this afternoon. We do have the book available at the back of the room, and our speakers will be up here to sign your copies for you. So again, thank you for coming and have a great rest of your day.